Well, here we go again. It's Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neill, the podcast seeking the very best in food, nutrition, and cuisine. I am Carolyn O'Neill, a registered dietitian and host of Watch What You Eat. And today we're going to take a little trip into the future with my guest, Mike Lee, who is a food futurist. And, whether that food future is delicious, maybe dystopian, we're up for a discussion with Mike. Now, Mike, you're in Detroit, and I met you through the Google Food Lab. And Mike also has his own podcast on the Spoon Podcast Network that we're both members of. And I'll show you a cover of that in a little bit. But we met, and one of the first things you were talking about at Google Food Lab was precision nutrition. And I remember that presentation like it was yesterday because, in nutrition, I'm a registered dietitian. A lot of people who are in this field listen to the podcast. It's always been about personalization, but you really took a deep dive into how could we use technology to go even further with precision nutrition, and how could it go wrong?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Yeah, that was a talk that I wanted to explore. This idea of personalized nutrition is something people have been talking about for a really long time. It almost seems like this holy grail when we'll solve all of our nutrition problems and things like that. And I don't want to discount it because I think it can definitely, just even the simple introduction of continuous glucose monitors, like that's adding a little bit more data that people can maybe do something with. And maybe over the next few decades, we'll have even more things like that that'll get an even more precise kind of vision of who you are from a metabolic standpoint and give you recommendations. In that presentation, in that story from my book, Mise, I wanted to kind of press the idea of like, if we perfected that technology, is it all that it's all cracked up to be? Like, we have this beautiful thing. And what happens from a social level when we're just following instructions from a robot every day? Where's the line? Like, just because you can forecast the perfect, so to speak, metabolically speaking, perfect meal for somebody, is that always the appropriate meal for the situation, right? Like, can you turn it
Yeah.
on airplane mode when you're having a slice of cake for someone's birthday, right? Or something like that. Or, so I just wanted to kind of explore it because I think that the thing that we've seen over the last few decades is, and probably the last few centuries, is we as humans design technology, obviously, but the technology we design also designs us. It shapes how we act, how we behave. And so it's just like, for the people that are working on inventing things around personalized nutrition, to just kind of keep that in mind, that nutrition is not just a chemistry experiment.
And
It's a
you
person.
and the article that you've written, and folks, if you haven't seen Mike's Substack, it's absolutely fantastic. And that, of course, is the FutureMarket on Substack. Um, you wrote about, the signal and noise of modern nutrition, navigating between science and sensationalism. One thing that jumped out at me in reference to what you're talking about in precision nutrition, and we have the numbers are great, but what are the metrics that matter? And does mealtime become a math problem?
Mm-hmm. It can if you let it. And certainly for hyper performance athletes, it probably already is. They're probably measuring all of their food in their chicken salad on a scale, one ingredient at a time. And that's fine. Anyone can eat however they want, right? I'm not here to prescribe a certain way of eating. But I just think that, it's if you're designing this kind of technology, you have to kind of think about the human element, and you got to think about how people actually live or want to live, and I honestly think that'll help with people to adhere to some kind of personalized nutrition regimen if they don't feel like they're maybe under the gun of the algorithm, all the time.
When I started my journey studying nutrition, I think it's so funny because we're talking about the future. The first thing that interested me was food history, and obviously we have to look back to see where we've come from. And people tend to romanticize the past, like eat like your grandparents ate or your great grandparents. I'm
Hmm.
thinking to myself, well, my great great grandparents were probably in the potato famine of Ireland, okay, or other
Right.
people or, being, when you think about Upton Sinclair writing the book, The Jungle, and the fraud and all the junk that was added to meat and food fraud. I'm a little worried about people glamorizing the past as it was
Mhm.
so much more natural. I mean, snake venom is natural end of the day. So
Right,
what are
right.
your thoughts about that as we craft a future? Should we not be romanticizing the past or learning something and bringing it with us, obviously?
I get the sentiment of why people romanticize the past, right? And I usually take that sentiment figuratively, not literally, because yeah, food safety has come a long way. Also, just like what the 1950s American plate looked like, humongous thing of meat in the middle, tiny little, overboiled vegetables on the side. Like, I don't know if we need to like keep that alive necessarily. Um, but it's this really fine balance I find in nutrition, especially, and kind of how people signal what is pure, what is good, and what is not. One of my favorite pet peeves of nutrition advice is don't eat ingredients you can't pronounce. And it's hard for me to say that out loud without sounding like I'm just a shill for like big food ingredient. I'm not. And the reason why I don't like it is because I think it kind of reinforces ignorance over real facts, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's also just an imperfect thing to say. Like, like everything has alternate names. Sodium bicarbonate is baking soda. The Chilean sea bass is called the Patagonian toothfish. Arsenic is a word I can pronounce. Is it okay to eat that? Right? So it's not that I'm
Nobody
advocating.
can pronounce Worcestershire sauce, so
Exactly. So I guess I have to throw away the Worcestershire sauce. No, exactly. And so I just don't, I don't appreciate it because I think it just kind of it's like a shortcut that kind of gives people the sense that they can free themselves from actually learning about an ingredient and making an informed choice, and they're just basing it on how strange it sounds. Like that's kind of like ingredient racism. It's like, oh, if it's got a name that doesn't sound like mine, I don't like this thing. And so again, I want to stress I am not here shilling for like big food saying you should eat all these hyper processed artificial ingredients. I just don't think you should be making your food choices on pronunciation alone. You should really dig in and figure out what the heck is xanthan gum. Is it okay? Is it not okay? And everyone's going to come to a different conclusion
Yeah, and
on
another
those
one
questions.
kinda like that, Mike, is, not to choose foods in the grocery store that have more than 3 ingredients, and I'm like, "Well, then you're not gonna be getting the vegetable soup then," you know? Like, so simplistic advice, I think we crave it, people crave it 'cause folks will say to me, "Tell me what to eat and why, but just don't tell me too much about the why, because my eyes will start to glaze over, and then, I've lost you." Which is another point that you made in, The Signal and Noise of Modern Nutrition, was when everyone's an expert, no one is,
Yeah.
and very, very important that a 22-year-old influencer with good lighting, by the way, we both have good lighting right now, gets more
Yes, we do.
caution than a registered dietitian with years of clinical training, because usually the sciencey person is going to, "Oh, but it depends," or like, "More research is needed," where, the influencers on TikTok or Instagram are saying, "Never eat this," or "Always eat this."
Yeah.
And this is nothing new. I think we've had this kind of, duality forever in nutrition education and in other areas of science education too, I'm sure.
It's just on steroids now, because the person that just says something like, Subway bread is made of yoga mats gets a lot of clicks, and that's unfortunately kind of the world we live in. I think if I were to wave a magic wand and change society, I would say I'd love for society idealistically to get to a place where saying it depends doesn't feel like you're weak or a cop out or you don't know anything. Like, I wanna get to a point where, like, "It depends" is said as almost a badge of honor. Like, no, it does depend. Like, let's acknowledge that every food situation is completely different, and, like, should you reduce the amount of sugar you're eating? Sure, probably. Should you eliminate it and, call all sugar poison? that's a little extreme, you know? So I just think that like everything has a time and a place. And I just think it's kind of making people just overly neurotic, you know?
Yeah,
Overly
I'm
neurotic
I'm
about it.
having an image because those of us who, buy cosmetics, you can go to the websites now and it'll say, talk about it depends. So here you're trying to decide the color, maybe, like how much moisturizer it has in there, and then you can click on, here's what color my eyes are, here's what color my hair is, or here's what my skin
Mhm.
feels like. And then it will you buy, obviously the right foundation or blush or eyeshadow, whatever the heck you're looking for. So in nutrition, it can kind of be the same thing. I mean, as a dietitian, this is what we do. We say, well, tell me about your food preferences. Tell me about your health goals. Tell me about this. So rather than thinking, why doesn't she know automatically what to tell me to eat? Think of it as me helping you to choose that perfect blush or
Yeah,
that perfect eyeshadow
it
for,
totally depends.
the outcome that you want. But
But modern media forces us almost implicitly to say, kale is BS. There's literally a guy that says that out there. He's a doctor, right? And he's like, kale is BS. I think he's like a keto like supporter or whatever, right? And it's like, for who? For what? Like, is it really like, I don't know. It's just it frustrates me, I think, when modern media kind of has maybe diluted the granularity of real kind of scientific conversations like this. And I hope we can get back to a place where that's not the case.
Okay. Mike, what got you into all of this? I love listening to you talk and hear you think and read all your stuff. And everybody, Mike Lee's podcast is called Tomorrow Today on the Future of Food, People, and the Planet. His book is Mise, Rethinking Reality. There it is again. You can see that cover. And
Graphics, love it. There it
yeah,
is.
we've got graphics here on Watch What You Eat because we're watching. We are watching. We're very visual here. I could be more visual because I used to be in television at CNN. So I could be, but what got you into this?
Well, I grew up in a restaurant family. Grandparents moved here in the 40s to Detroit, had one of the early Chinese restaurants in the Detroit area. Parents had a restaurant, aunts and uncles had a restaurant. Always grew up around food. And then, of course, in middle school, the Food Network came online. And I remember watching, you and I have shared stories about Graham Kerr, used to work for him, and I used to watch him a lot. So I kind of grew up in that oxygen of like foodie culture. I moved to New York in the early 2000s when supper clubs were happening, and I was working a day job in innovation and unrelated food, a non-food a medium. But I was like, I had a hankering to do something in food, but I knew I didn't want to open a restaurant. I didn't want to go through the whole rigmarole of like completely changing my career and getting the investment to do that. So me and some friends started just cooking these like unlicensed dinners and selling tickets to people, and we did that for about 11 years. And then fast forward to, I think, Chobani saw an article about our supper club, and a headhunter called, and this is back when you had to Google what Chobani was. It was that early. And then I went over there and worked on the innovations team over there. And so that was, I guess, my like formal, where an official paycheck was coming from a food company, I guess you could market there. But I had been kind of playing with my food with the supper club for years before that, since like 2007. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Gosh, I remember when yogurt was a new vocabulary word for the
Yeah.
people in, upstate New York where I grew up. My mom was so innovative. I think she bought like a carton of Dannon yogurt, and it was packaged in sort of a cardboard-like container that had a wax coating,
Yeah.
which the
Yeah.
milk cartons were made out of too, I guess, back then too. And
Yeah.
now when you think about it, I mean, yogurt is like, what would people do without it? My gosh, it's life-giving. It's everything you can imagine. And now speaking of Dannon, they've just come out with their how high can you go in protein, oikos, just like a power pack of everybody wants
Yeah.
protein. Actually, protein's kind of sucking all the air out of the room right now for the other nutrients.
It
And
really
I
is.
understand fiber's on deck, just to, launch its own fiber verse. So
I'd love to get into fiber arms race just to change it up a bit, honestly. Like I think we as humans tend to fixate on we have to fixate on a single thing all the time for just our attention's sake. And protein's important. Is it as important as the media would suggest? Like, I don't know, right? There was an article in the Times this week kind of dispelling this idea of like, your baby doesn't need extra protein. And I think it was in response to like a new cadre of like, baby foods that are loaded in protein. But this conversation is the same. Like in the 80s, it was sugar and fat, right? Get rid of sugar, get rid of fat, right? Fat is the worst. And now fat's like, now everyone's like, no, throw away all those seed oils. Let's get everything back in beef tallow, So we just kind of ping pong back and forth. So yeah, I eagerly welcome the fiber arms race next, just so we have something new to talk about besides protein.
Yay, I know. And what's interesting about fiber, it is, just like anything else, there's many, many different kinds of fiber, just like we got lots of different minerals, lots of different vitamins. There's all these different kinds of fibers. It's not just like a tale of two cities. Remember, it was a tale of two fibers, soluble and insoluble. Now we got our prebiotics, we got our probiotics, we got our this, that, the other thing, and this source and that source. Oh no, this one's better for your gut. This one's better for, elimination. This one.
Mhm.
So hold on, people. Hold on to your whole wheat bread. I don't know, but it's going to be another bumpy ride. And by the way, too much fiber will give you a bumpy ride if you load up on that before you fly across country. Remember, there's only so many bathrooms on those aircraft. And I was a dietitian with Delta Airlines. I don't think we should plan a high fiber meal at 30,000 feet, to be
That's a
honest.
good call.
See, it
That's a good
depends.
call. It
It
depends.
depends. You might need some depends. Okay, but anyway. But no, let's talk about Mise a little bit more. And I'm just going to pull up a page, and this is
Sure.
actually, I believe, the back cover, and this really caught my attention. Here we have I was going to say Svetlana, but she's Lara. And it was a fake ad, for lack of a better description. And tell us a little bit about this. And those of you listening, you can go to YouTube and see these images. And certainly I'll have all these images on the show notes so you can click on that and follow along as Mike
Yeah.
describes. So tell us about this.
So this ad is for a fictional product in the future called Sveltara. It's essentially a GLP-1, but dosed through a patch, and an attractive patch at that, where it becomes almost a fashion accessory, right? So like Mise is loaded with all kinds of these satirical ads. I was such a big fan growing up watching SNL and watching the fake ads. Like, speaking of fiber, remember that colon blow, like
Oh,
that.
yeah. Oh,
Hilarious, right? And so I really like a little bit of what I try to infuse into the food future stuff that I do is a little bit of that levity, a little bit of that satire, because I think it's entertaining as a hook, but I think good satire has a really a thread of honesty and critique about culture, right? And so it's a fun ad. I put it on the back cover because it was just GLP-1 is of the moment, so everyone's talking about it. And I just thought, like, okay, well, where does this go, right? GLP-1s are going to take the world by storm. What does that actually look like, right? It's a shot now. It's going to be oral next. Maybe it's something else later, right? Maybe it's just like a patch or something like that. So, it's really so many of these conversations are so heady and so serious, and rightfully so. I don't want to undermine that, but I do think that food is part of culture, and I think satire deals with culture. And so I wanted to combine the two. And honestly, we in the food industry should always find an excuse to have an extra laugh, right? So if it
oh
made
yeah.
somebody giggle, that's really great. But I think there's value in that. I think it flags that something's different in the world, and it just makes you think about something a little bit differently instead of just kind of being autopilot and having the same GLP-1 conversation over and over again.
And end of the day, comedy is intellectual. I mean, you really have to dig deep down, and it's a message that when you think of cartoons that are in the New Yorker, many of them are restaurant related, food related, and just getting into the way people think. I remember when a study came out years ago that showed that drinking alcohol could actually raise your good cholesterol, or the HDL,
Yeah.
as running. Okay. And then there was this cartoon that showed a guy at a bar, and he had a glass of wine, a glass of beer, and a scotch. And he says, "Hey, look, I'm a triathlete." You
That's so good. That's
know
so
what I mean?
good.
You get it. And
Yeah, I love that stuff.
in
And I think
essence,
that the ads that I put in the book are really like political cartoons. That's
yeah,
really what they are.
yeah. Okay, another picture because we can't talk about the future of food without talking about farming, agriculture. So again,
Mhm.
this is just an image and it shows, the farmer, classic farmer looking out across his field with a plaid shirt on, of course. And in the sky, with a beautiful sunset or sunrise, depending, are drones, 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 and drones. So what's going on here? And
Well,
let's
I
talk
mean,
about farming.
this is already happening in some farms. Like farms are starting to use drones to scan their soil, look at, things and track data and what have you. So I think that was just a fairly simple projection of just saying, well, if one drone's good, how about 20? How about 40, right? Are we going to get to a place where, these things get cheaper? And I think like, precision agriculture, I think is generally a good thing, right? I think like if you can have a tool that, allows you to precisely water in a certain spot or precisely spray something, like a herbicide or pesticide in a lower dose than just blanketing the whole farm with it. I think that's a win, so I think precision ag has a really great thing, and it comes back to that theme you talked about of like over romanticizing the past, right? Like I know we want more simple farming, methods, right? Getting a lot of, GMOs, pesticides, artificial inputs in there. There's a huge movement, I think, that is around that. But like, I don't know if you want to go all the way back to like how they farmed in, the 1900s or something like that, right? We can keep some of this stuff and still have a cleaner food system going forward. It's just a question of what you keep and what you get rid of.
And you know what's different today, even if you were using, old fangled, kind of things. I was, in the Champagne region of France, and they said, "Oh, wow, we just discovered that, actually using horses or mules or other farm animals walk through, the vineyards helped aerate the soil. And of course, they left their, fertilizer along the way. But I think what's different today are the metrics that are available to measure something. Is this working? How can we
Hmm.
adjust it? That maybe it took a farmer back in the 19th century a few seasons to figure out if it was working or not. I think we maybe that's how science is helping in farming. And so folks who say, I don't want big ag, I'm like, I don't understand that. I mean, if you need surgery, are you going to the country doctor or are you gonna go maybe to the medical center with the best equipment and the best science available? You're going to the medical center.
Yeah, but there's people that don't want to,
I know.
right? I'm not saying I'm one of them, but I think like one thing that is, I think probably guaranteed for the future of food is that we're going to have more diverse viewpoints on things, not less, right?
Mm,
I was talking to, a mom that was scared to her baby needed like an MRI for some reason, and she was terrified to do it, like and she did it, right? And that's completely her right to do. But I think like to your point about like, are you going to want the fancy hospital? We might, not everyone will, right? And so it's this really interesting challenge of kind of like, how do we kind of live in this like pluralistic society of different viewpoints of nutrition and environment? And I think where it gets dicier is when like personal choices can kind of affect others, right? That's kind of the center of the vaccination debate, because like the whole thing with vaccines is it doesn't really work unless almost everybody gets them, right? If no one's really doing it, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So I think that's a huge open-ended point of contention. We have to learn how to metabolize going in the future. Like, how do we stay true to things that people think are real in a world where real is kind of defined by the individual? That's really hard.
yeah, and, information often isn't enough. I mean, there are beliefs, are there fears, things like that that are valid. These are real things that people feel. So
I-
back to farming.
Information is it's all emotion. We solved access to information pretty much. We arguably have access to too much information, right? I think it's all purely emotion, because you're not going to tell an anti-vaxxer how much you don't believe in what their belief is by giving them the facts about vaccines, and vice versa. It's not a logical argument anymore, it's an emotional one, you know?
Mhm. And I'll bring it back to nutrition. I remember in the South Beach diet, you were not allowed to eat carrots because they were offensive to your weight management goals. And a friend of mine would just like pick out carrots from the salad. I'm like, what's going on here? Oh no, carrots are fattening. That's what I learned. Like, oh,
Carrots are fattening.
well, I'm just so then
I know.
as a and a Southern, oh, bless your heart. But you also talk about, which is a serious thing, is when is correlation and causation. These are two different things, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when I had a sign in my office at CNN when I was, had a team there that I led covering food, nutrition, and cuisine, and I had a little sign for everybody to read. It said, uh, you know, 98% of the people with cancer ate carrots, let's say. That means carrots must cause cancer. No,
Right. Right.
you cannot
Right.
jump to those conclusions, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
But there's so much of that, and I think also, like, AI bots can be helpful or harmful to that. Like, AI has proven, or in its early stage now, it can be a sycophant for you, and you can kind of massage it to kind of write an essay for you that convinces people that carrots are fattening. You can kind of do anything you want, and so, yeah, I don't know. This is probably one of the biggest open questions that I have for the future of food is how do we change the dialogue about it, right? Or are we just going to be splintered in these tribes doing our own thing? And it's almost like the smoking and non-smoking section in the restaurant. Like, okay, well, you got the anti-vaxxer section, you got the vaxxer section here, you got the people who think carrots are fattening here, people that don't. Here, it's like you can slice that up so infinitely in all of these different permutations of values people have now. So,
Ooh, let's use a real life example, Mike. Okay, so in the news, and again, you may be listening to this podcast with Mike Lee, the food futurist, months from now, or maybe the day after tomorrow. But um, Chef Daniel Hume at 11 Madison Park famously added meat right back to the menu. And I guess it was just after the pandemic that they went all veg. And it's a big deal. I mean, everybody's writing about it saying, oh, we told you so. We knew they couldn't survive. And then you know what I thought, Mike? I thought to myself, nobody made a big hurrah when a restaurant that serves everything added vegetarian dishes. Oh, we knew they couldn't do it without adding a vegetarian dish. It's
yeah.
just, it's just what's going on, do you think, with that? With how would you describe?
I It's so funny because I've never seen so much, like, uh I don't know, agita, whatever you want to call it, online for a restaurant that is like designed for the 1% of the 1%. I've been there in their way in their early days, like back when they used to do magic tricks at the table, which was also kind of controversial. But I just think it's funny because it's like a certain part of it's like, who cares? It's like that is not indicative of how the world eats. But I do think that, like, in the subtext of the article, it basically says, when they did the about face, like, they just said it could have just been reduced to one sentence: we weren't making enough money on vegetables. Period. We got to put meat back on because people don't buy the 1997 Sassicaia Magnum when they're eating a vegan meal. They buy that when they get the ribeye, or something like that. So, yeah, it's. I guess that, I don't know. Maybe it's a metric for where we are society. Maybe not. I mean, it's just so skewed to an audience,
Well,
right?
let me ask the magic 8 ball. Like,
Oh,
I don't
you
have
have
a
an eight
crystal
ball.
ball.
Oh my gosh, this is great.
I have a magic 8 ball.
Love
Okay,
it.
wait, what are we talking? It doesn't really. It says, of course, the most famous one, which I always got, was, "Does so and so like me?" Ask again later. Okay, so it's always for the future. Ask again later. But it's interesting. You were talking about the 1% of the 1%. Another headline today, which I saw, which jumped out at me, was Olive Garden holds the line on pasta bowl pricing. Okay, this is obviously not the 1% of the 1%, but these giant concept, multi-concept restaurants, and it's funny. I think a lot of people are first introduced to quote unquote ethnic foods. When you think about, Italian, you mentioned Chinese restaurants in your community, Mexican, when it didn't used to be a thing. I think I didn't even have guacamole. I grew up in Florida until I moved to San Diego. So now when you think about the diversity of menu items and really global representation on so many menus, from mid-price casual even to, quick serve on up to fancy.
I think that's a great trend to support it, and you're right. I think, like, I love really good coffee. I don't think I'm a coffee snob, but I like good coffee, right? And I think, like, even though, like, it's not my favorite place to have coffee, like, Starbucks did an amazing job paving the way for the fourth wave coffee producers, like the Blue Bottles of the world, because I think it was an on-ramp, right? Because there was upon a time where coffee was just there's one kind of coffee in America, at least, and you probably got it from Dunkin' Donuts or, like, a diner, and it was just didn't have a really name on it. Starbucks is not the best coffee in the world, in my opinion, but for every 100 people that fell in love with Starbucks in the 90s, maybe 10 of them moved on to say, like, what else is out there, And that just kind of built the connoisseurship and the language around it. And now people are kind of, relatively fluent in at least like Starbucks speak, right? So I think that's good. Yeah. I mean, like, I think it has social value, honestly, to be able to taste more foods from different cultures, because I think that there's so much kind of vitriol about othering people, like this person, this group, ethnic group I don't like, this group I don't like. I'm not saying that having that group's food is the end all be all to solving the problems, but I think it's a really good first step to just kind of understand someone else's culture. It's a first step, right? Just to show like what it's all about. And I think for the people, not everyone will go deeper on it but if someone is going to a Mexican restaurant for the first time, they have the opportunity to go deeper on it, even if their first is like a chain restaurant, like a Tex-Mex chain restaurant, right? You got to start somewhere, unless if you weren't born in that culture, right? So I have no qualms over that, and I'm glad to see kind of the rapidly more diversification and globalization of food. I think it's a good thing generally.
I do too. And even from the moderation, variety, balance of the world of nutrition, it is also so many of the foods from different cultures are more healthful in terms of their meal patterns and just the way things are brought together, flavors without a lot of sodium and
Hmm.
sugar and fat. And even if there's some sodium, sugar, and fat, okay, so you know what? Like Julia Child said, everything in moderation, even excess. Every once in a while, you can have a little fun. And so, Mike, just in wrapping up here, we have so much more to talk about in the future. Um, you, your most recent piece that I looked at really did look way, way, way into the future. And one take was dystopian, as I teased at the beginning of our talk here, and one was more deliciousness of people farming, on their roofs and growing bees. Where are we going? Where are we going, Mike? And how do we get to the good place?
I think we're going to all of it simultaneously. Honestly, I used to feel like that was a cop out answer. I don't, because I feel like it's the truth. I think trying to nail down what the future of food is in one sentence is increasingly harder and probably impossible to do, right? Um, we can't, I mean, arguments people have online, they can't even agree if the earth is round or flat. That's insane. How are we ever going to expect to all agree on the fact that one food should be the thing? I mean, the protein thing is actually kind of astonishing, because for as much as people don't agree on a lot of stuff, it seems a lot of people agree that they love protein, right? So maybe there is hope that we can like coalesce around like certain trends. Like I said, I alluded to before, like I don't know if fiber is going to be the next it thing. I don't know if it's going to be something else. I don't know if protein will come. I do know that there will be some it thing. The problem with, I think, the Julia Child way of eating, which I love, is, eating in moderation, eating diverse, is it's harder to make a buck off of that, unfortunately. It's real. How are you going to raise $100 million for a startup that tries to incentivize people to eat a little bit of everything, not too much of one thing, in moderation? And like, it's a lot harder to get somebody to give you money to do a company that supports that, rather than saying, give me $100 million, I'm going to make this plant bleed and taste like a burger. It's a
Yeah.
lot easier that way. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what has proven to be the case so far, where ironically, like, you didn't have to jump through all those hoops to make a burger out of a plant. You just had to, like, maybe not eat so much burger and just build some veg around it, right? You can still have a burger, don't freak out. But just moderation, and I don't know. I think the algorithms don't appreciate moderation. They appreciate black and white, bold statements. And until we can change that, I don't know how the conversation's gonna change.
Well, I've always said that the more you know, the more you can eat. I really do
Yes.
believe that. The more you know about food, nutrition, farming, the future, the past, the more you can eat. It actually kind of empowers you and relaxes you to say, oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, that's how much I can have of that. It's like even sugar. It's like, it's not the demon. It's like sunshine. We need a little bit of sunshine, not too much. You're going to get
Yeah.
wrinkles, skin cancer.
Yeah.
Sugar, you can have a little. In fact, that even, like they put the droplet on a baby's tongue and it smiles, or bitter and it
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
this, because
Yeah.
it was an indicator that that was a source of calories, and the
Yeah.
bitter was a source of maybe a toxin. And
Mhm.
so if you like sugar, folks, I always say you know, keep your enemies close, or no, your friends close and your enemies closer. Get to know, a little bit about how to use it in cooking. I don't know.
I I'm totally of the school, like, I would much rather eat a small amount of real sugar than a lot of fake sugar. And that's just a taste thing as well too, but also just from, I don't know, it just feels healthy. I don't know, healthier to me, but that's all subjective. I don't really have any scientific proof about that. I also just don't have much of a sweet tooth, so it's probably easy for me to say because I don't gravitate towards sweets naturally, right? So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, that brings up another thing. We talked about Oikos, the Dannon new, like super high protein
Yeah.
yogurt. Obviously, with their CPG innovation, they also determined that same customer didn't want to see any added sugar. That was another one of those like deal breakers for them. And so it's hard to find it you got to really search until you go to the ingredients panel. It is sweetened with stevia leaf extract. I tasted it at the University of Massachusetts Chef Culinary Conference there. And to me, it was so sickeningly sweet because it's with stevia. And stevia right now is going through a time where they're trying to figure out, I guess it's got 20 different components in it. They're trying to improve the aftertaste, because the aftertaste is really something else,
Mhm.
I think. Maybe doesn't matter to the people that are reaching for a high protein, no added sugar yogurt drink. But yeah, innovation, the future. It is, I don't know. It's like the snake oil. I'm not comparing them with snake oil salesmen, but there's always a little bit of truth in everything, you know?
Yeah, there is, and CPG kinda it's if you're a chef at a restaurant, you can cook for someone almost on a one-to-one basis, and if they don't like it, they send it back and you fix the problem. CPG is like cooking for a million people blind and in advance, right? And so you have to do all of these things to research the hell out of everything to figure out what's going to be the most palatable for a critical mass of people, right? And so I guess enough people have settled on the fact that stevia is acceptable and things like that, and that's their right. That's fine, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, or as they said at Baskin Robbins, that's why we have 31 flavors. I guess it's a little something for everybody.
I like to spin it in a positive level. Like, I think eating that diverse diet is in moderation. You can twist that into thinking that that's like I don't know, like restraint or whatever. I almost like to look at it as hedonism and being like like a foodie kind of exploratory eater, right? Like, it's not only, I think, good for just you creatively and emotionally and exciting to eat new foods and flavors. It also kind of helps ensure that your diet isn't too heavily indexed towards just eating Big Macs all day, it's just, I don't know. It's funny how, like, if you told your stockbroker or your financial advisor, like, I want to put all of my money into Bitcoin, my whole retirement into Bitcoin, they would say, no, you're not. Do not do that, right? Yet there's people that eat like that, Like, I'm only going to put all of my, calories in these three stocks, so to speak, right? And so I don't know. It's just we're clearly capable of diversifying things in other realms in our life. It's just sometimes with food, maybe it's just too mentally taxing for people that don't think about food all the time to entertain all of these different foods, and it's easier to slip into the routine. That's probably what it is.
When I think about it, and just to wrap up here, the food future, the food past, when I first went to Disney World and went to Epcot, okay, and I don't know if you folks out there know what Epcot stands for. Did you know what it stands for?
Experimental project of some.
You're
Okay, I know the. I know.
Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, I was even asking people at Disney and they didn't know. But anyway, that's where Walt, he had like the future of farming and with the vertical farms that were in the land. And then there was aquaculture in the seas. And then, of course, you could go to the World Showcase and get something to eat and drink in France, in Italy, in China. I mean, Canada. I didn't spend much time in Canada. And then it was like Mexico was more exciting. And then the English pub. And it was like, wow, we can, like you can go to all of the countries. And, so that was, I think, where a lot of of course, my dad did travel internationally. He was a purser on board the SS United States, which is going to be sunk off the coast of Florida as the world's largest reef. But anyway, Dad was a purser on that beautiful ship.
Wow.
But that's, I think, where I got a lot of my international food excitement when we'd pick him up at Pier 60 in New York every 2-3 months when he came home from sailing around the world. And I was so excited because you'd see him come down the gangplank, the whatever it was called. And we knew he had presents for us from some foreign land. And then we went to dinner. We got to choose either Chinatown or Little Italy in New York.
Yeah.
And so that was exciting. But I think that travel today is never been hotter. And what I love to see is how young people, Mike, the 20-something, 30-something, 40, whatever, and even the people who are now into retirement are going into more adventurous vacations than they ever have been before. We know the world is troubled in many spots today, but travel does not seem to be slowing down. And people are going places they've never been before because, again, I think they feel that they're armed with information before they go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's a good first step to build empathy. I don't know. Like for a long time, I always felt like they should have some kind of program where if you live in an urban environment, you can go live on a farm for a week and vice versa. And you don't have to live there forever. I just think it would just help in building empathy for and breaking down that kind of urban rural divide, and just showing people what it's really like. Right. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we could all use a little bit of that.
Well, Mike Lee, author and designer of Mise on the future of food, um, host of Tomorrow Today podcast on the Spoon Podcast Network, and of course the Substack, which is the Future Market, and all kinds of things that you do and wonderful presentations. Can't wait to hear your next one. So thanks again for being a guest on Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neill.
Thanks for having me. Always fun to talk to you, Carolyn. Always.
You too. To be continued. We'll have you back, of course. And everyone listening is, of course, invited to add this podcast to their favorite podcast menu. And we'll see you next time for the best in food, nutrition, and cuisine.